Imagine being on the cusp of a thrilling fantasy football season, only to have one of your key players' fate hanging in the balance due to a looming suspension. This is the precarious situation facing Rashee Rice, the talented wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs, and by extension, his fantasy football stock. The news of an imminent suspension has left fantasy managers in limbo, wondering what the future holds for Rice and how it will impact their draft strategies. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. The suspension's timing and length are still major question marks, leaving everyone involved in a state of uncertainty. To understand the situation better, let's delve into the details of the case. Rashee Rice pleaded guilty to 2 felony charges stemming from a significant traffic violation in Dallas in March 2024. As part of his sentencing, he received 5 years of probation and 30 days in jail, and he also reached a settlement with all the victims of the crash. However, the NFL has its own set of standards outlined in the personal conduct policy, which is part of every NFL contract. Players who violate this policy are subject to suspension, and Rice's case is no exception. The determination of the suspension's length will be decided by Judge Sue L. Robinson, with the hearing scheduled to take place after the start of the NFL season on September 30th. This timing is crucial for the Chiefs, as it means Rice will likely begin the season on the active roster, making him available to play in the initial weeks. Specifically, he will be able to participate in weeks 1 through 4, which include matchups against the Chargers in Brazil, the Eagles at home, the Giants away, and the Ravens at home. 2 of these games are significant AFC matchups, and 1 is a Super Bowl rematch. But after Week 4, everything is up in the air. For those who might not be familiar with Judge Robinson's handling of similar cases, it's worth noting that she was the judge who presided over the Deshaun Watson hearing on June 28, 2022. Interestingly, she didn't rule on that case until August 1, 2022, more than a month after the hearing. Following her recommendation of a 6-game suspension for Watson, the NFL appealed the decision, which eventually led to an agreement on an 11-game suspension with a $5 million fine between the NFL and the NFL Players Association. If Judge Robinson follows a similar timeline for Rice's case, we might not have a decision until around Halloween, which would be Week 9 of the season. The Chiefs have a bye in Week 10, adding another layer of complexity to the situation. But here's the part most people miss. Just because Judge Robinson took her time in the Watson case doesn't necessarily mean she will do the same with Rice. The evidence in Rice's case is relatively clear, given his admission of guilt, which could potentially expedite the process. However, if she rules too harshly, the NFL Players Association could appeal the decision, leading to further delays. In such a scenario, Roger Goodell or a designated representative would hear the appeal, potentially pushing Rice's suspension into December, although an extension into 2026 seems highly unlikely. The implications of Rice's suspension for fantasy football are significant. The best-case scenario for fantasy managers would be no suspension at all, although this seems like a long shot. A more plausible best-case scenario would be a suspension of 5 games or fewer, possibly covering the Chiefs' games between weeks 5 and 9. A 6 to 8 game suspension is considered more likely, which would keep Rice off the field until after the Chiefs' Week 10 bye, but allow him to return before the end of the regular season. The worst-case scenario, an extended suspension beyond 8 games, would unfortunately make Rice irrelevant for the remainder of the regular season. So where does this leave fantasy managers in terms of drafting Rashee Rice? The announcement of his impending suspension certainly doesn't make him a more attractive pick. If anything, it makes him even more of a gamble. Drafting him means you'll have him for the first 4 weeks, but his availability for the fantasy playoff run is uncertain. Given these circumstances, his current average draft position around 70th overall might still be justified if you draft him with the understanding that you're taking a risk. However, when comparing him to other receivers who won't be facing a suspension, the choice becomes more complicated. One strategy could be drafting a receiver who will be available to play during the time Rice is suspended. For example, Jordan Addison, who will miss the first 3 games, could complement Rice well, as Addison would return in Week 4, potentially aligning with the start of Rice's suspension. This approach, however, requires filling an extra roster spot with another receiver, which could be a mid-round rookie or even another Chiefs wideout, like Marquise Brown or Jalen Royals. Given the uncertainty surrounding Rice's situation, it might be prudent to adjust his draft position. Moving him down to early round 7 could be a reasonable response, considering the potential headache of rostering him. It's also important to note that other Chiefs players, such as Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce, might see an uptick in targets during Rice's absence, but it's premature to reach for them without a clearer timeline. Similarly, while Brown and Royals could become waiver adds when Rice's suspension begins, they aren't must-draft players, especially if they'll occupy a roster spot for at least 4 weeks. As the fantasy football community waits with bated breath for Judge Robinson's ruling and the subsequent fallout, one thing is clear. The situation with Rashee Rice is a complex and evolving one. And this is the part that sparks debate. Should fantasy managers take a chance on Rice, hoping for a minimal suspension, or play it safe with more reliable options? The answer, much like the outcome of Rice's case, remains to be seen. But here's the question. How will you approach drafting Rashee Rice in your fantasy football league? And what strategies do you think will give you an edge despite the uncertainty surrounding his suspension?